2 years ago, I had a chance to work in the Siberian forests. Once a month for a week, we were thrown into the wilderness about 70 kilometers from the nearest settlement. And even the closest village was a remote village with broken, rickety houses, where 20 old people lived at most. We had to prepare a hut and a bathhouse for the peasants, and cut wood for 3 weeks a month. So we chopped wood, replenished the supply of water from a nearby stream, repaired buildings. There was no end to the work, and there were only two of us, my partner and me. Not everyone will like this kind of work. It paid well, but still, it was only a part-time job, and workers often changed, giving this damn job to others. In hindsight, I should have paid attention to this. One of these shifts brought me together with a young boy named Slavka, tall, strong, and a hard worker. It was winter, in December. The cold had not yet set in, but it was freezing already, with knee-deep snowdrifts throughout the forest. The driver dropped us off at the hut and left. We decided to start working the next day. But for now, get comfortable, drink, talk, get to know each other. I must say that Slavka was not a particularly talkative guy. He seemed smart, kind, but he listened more than he spoke. To be honest, I don't like this in people. Well, let me not judge. We drank and talked until it was time to get ready to sleep, but Slavka put on his clothes. I asked him, "Where are you going?" "Out for a smoke." "I'll take a walk before going to bed," he replied. Strange, but oh well, I thought, and turned away and fell into sleep. I woke up, and it was still dark. Slavka pushes me and says, "Get ready, it's time to work." Dividing duties between the two of us, we went to work. I had to cut a hole in the stream from where we would draw water, and Slavka was supposed to start chopping wood. I went to a small stream about 4 meters wide. It was located behind a hillock, in a small gorge. On both sides of the stream there was a pine forest. The stream was covered with a thick crust of ice, and it was remarkable that the path was trodden to it. Otherwise, it would have been necessary to go through snowdrifts. A slightly icy hole was visible in the middle of the stream. I cut it down with an axe, and having collected water in 2 buckets, I went to the hut. Slavka had already chopped a fair amount of logs. I thought that perhaps we would finish the job faster than a week, and even get a little rest before leaving. Having filled several tanks completely, I decided to go for the last time that day for water, and then rest, because twilight was already beginning, and I didn't really want to work in the dark. When I went down to the stream, something caught my eye. Traces of what appeared to be footprints from the opposite bank of the stream, leading to the hole I cut. Of course, I was very surprised, but still I thought that I might not have noticed these traces earlier, and that most likely the men from the past shift had left them. I thought that I just didn't pay attention before, and reassured myself with this thought. Got some water, and went to the hut. I didn't even ask Slavka if these were his footprints. But, on the other hand, he had nothing to do by the stream. We spent the evening in silence. No one talked about anything. We both went about our own business. I read a book, and Slavka lay on the bed and silently looked at the ceiling. Apparently, he was thinking about something. Before going to bed, Slavka, just as he had done the previous evening, silently began to dress. I asked, "Are you going to breathe the night air again?" He chuckled softly and slammed the door behind him. I do not like such silent and withdrawn people, and even more so, to be alone with them in the taiga. But nothing can be done about it at this point. The shift needs to be finalized. I immersed myself in the book again, and did not notice how an hour or an hour and a half had passed. Looking at my watch, I was very surprised. Is he really somewhere in the dark, walking through the dark forest? Where and why does he go? To get some air? That should take about 15 minutes, I thought. Throwing on a coat, I went out on the porch to smoke a cigarette, looked around. The dark forest in front of me. My eyes never clung to anything. Slavka must be here somewhere, but nothing is seen or heard around. I was a little scared. Did he get lost? But I had no desire to go looking for him. I went to bed and fell asleep again. Slavka woke me up again in the morning. I was crumpled in bed and reluctantly began to get ready for work. When I asked where he had disappeared for so long last night, he answered indistinctly, "Walked." On this we parted. I fetched water again, and he was still chopping wood. Something happened that day that alarmed me and frightened me. I again went to the stream for water, and again saw the same traces in the snow. I was thinking about them, collecting water, and accidentally missed the bucket from my hands. It went to the bottom. Taking off my coat and rolling up my sleeves, I began to search the bottom of the stream with my hands. It was good that the stream was shallow. The bucket was slightly carried away by the current. After 10 minutes of effort, I nevertheless pulled it out of the stream and began to wrap myself in my coat, cursing. I took the buckets and turned to go to the hut, but then I noticed new footprints. They came from the same bank where I came from, but a little to the right of my path. The tracks came from the forest. They were definitely not here before. So, in the 10 minutes that I was poking around with a bucket, someone came out of the forest, looked at me and went back. I peered into the forest, but saw nothing. I got goosebumps. It was extremely unpleasant to realize this whole situation, and the only thing I could do was to assume that Slavka had come. I rushed to the hut. Slavka was chopping wood. I asked him if it was him, but he said he wasn't, and most likely thought that I was making fun of him. I took him to the hole and showed him the tracks. We both scratched our heads, smoked, speculated, but found no explanation. The nearest village, as I already mentioned, was very far from us, and even if someone had arrived or passed by, we would have noticed, since after all, there is only one road. From that moment on, we decided to stick together. We didn't go for water that day anymore, and just chopped more firewood. That evening passed quietly. This time Slavka remained in the hut. Most likely, he also felt uneasy, and we sat all evening and argued where these ill-fated traces could come from. In the morning, we worked together. In the first half of the day, we carried water. In the second half, we chopped firewood. That day passed without incident, except that in the evening, Slavka got ready to go somewhere again. And the thought that he would again go into the dark forest for several hours to walk in some unknown place through huge snowdrifts made me feel uneasy. Or perhaps he walks along the road in front of our hut, I thought. But that still doesn't make it any easier. Moreover, these footprints are incomprehensible. Maybe you will still stay? We still don't understand where these footprints came from, I told him. I'll be right back, he muttered and walked out the door. That night, he never returned. After waiting for him for 3 or 4 hours, I despaired and went to bed. I did not want to go out into the forest and look for him. The next morning he was not there either. I was worried, very worried. I went out into the forest, tried to find him for half a day, but did not see any traces. Then I thought that he maybe walked along the knurled road that led towards the village, but after walking several kilometers along it, I did not find anything and realized that I was very tired, because I had been on my feet since morning. Only one thought came into my head. Maybe he went to the village and stayed there to have a drink with the peasants. The thought was funny, and this could not be in any way, but it somehow consoled me, and that was enough. I could not do anything. There was no point in even thinking about this while you are in the taiga. The car was supposed to come for us in 3 days. Of course, I understood that a person's life was in danger, and just in case I decided to walk around the hut again through the forest, maybe I would stumble upon some traces. But, having examined the surroundings, I again did not find either Slavka or any traces of him. It was already getting dark, and belatedly I realized that since morning I should have gone on foot to the village and call rescuers. I decided to return to the hut and get up early in the morning and walk to the village. On the way to the hut, I had a disturbing feeling. My head was spinning with unanswered questions. What happened to Slavka? Where did he go? Where did he disappear to? Where did these traces come from near the hole? I went into the hut, kindled the stove, and began to warm up. After a while, I was pulled out of my thoughts by footsteps outside. Someone was walking through the snow towards the door. I was happy as a child. Slavka had returned. I jumped up, ran to the exit, opened the door and leaned outside. My joy was instantly replaced by horror. On the steps to the hut, something stood. It was hardly a man. I still cannot understand what then met with me face to face. Even in the warm light from the hut, his face was dead white when I opened the door. In the place where the eyes should have been, there were black hollow circles. So black that at first it seemed to me that there were no eyes at all. But, looking closer, I saw two black beads in place of the eyes. But even those eyes were not as scary as his mouth. It was huge, as if it had been cut with a knife from ear to ear. It felt like he was smiling. The teeth were sharp as fangs. He was completely bald, and his skin was as wrinkled as if he had been in the water for a week. He was huge, as he stood several steps below me, but his head was higher than mine. I don't know for how long I stared at it in horror. It seemed to me that an eternity had passed. But in fact, most likely it was 2, maximum 3 seconds. I slammed the door shut and locked it. At that moment, a wild scream came from outside the door. I immediately rushed to the corner with my heart rushing, grabbing a hunting knife from the table. I heard footsteps in the snow. This creature walked around the hut. A few minutes later, I heard several steps at the same time. There were 2 of them, and maybe 3. They walked around. I sat with my back against the wall, in complete panic. Suddenly, one of them hit the wall so hard that a candle fell off the shelf. At that very moment, another one started banging on the window. I fell face down on the floor, clutching the knife painfully in my hand. I was afraid to look out the window. I didn't want to see that scary face again. I don't know how long I laid there. They walked around the house, knocked on the door, on the wall, on the window. And so it went on all night while I lay on the floor, covering my face with my hands, sunk in horror. Now it seems to me that they just wanted to intimidate me, because they could break the window or try to break the door, but they didn't do any of this. They just walked around the hut. Everything was quiet in the morning, but even then, I did not dare to go out. It seemed to me that even if I went to the village, I would not make it before dark. Or maybe even daylight didn't frighten them. After all, it seems to me that it was one of them who came out from the forest and stalked me while I gathered water in the hole. I did not dare to go to the village. For 3 days, I did not go outside and did not unlock the door. I was afraid. I did not eat these 3 days and wasn't even hungry. Only wild fear. For 3 days, I was afraid to look out the window. I was afraid that no one would come for me, that I would remain here alone in the forest. I was afraid that these creatures would come again at night, but this did not happen. 3 days later, a car came for me. They took me out of there in a terrible state. Slavka was put on a missing list. A week later, he was found by volunteers about 10 kilometers from the hut in the forest. Or rather, they found what was left of him. His body was deformed. No, he was not gutted, eaten, or cut. He hung on a tree, or rather stuck there. His body was stretched. It's hard to imagine, but the torso, arms, legs, and neck were stretched out like chewing gum that had been chewed and wrapped around a finger. The eyes were gouged out, and his jaw was missing. What happened to his body was unthinkable. I saw photographs during the interrogation. After all, it was I who was with him in the hut, and it was I who was suspected in the first place. Subsequently, an unidentified natural disaster was named as the cause of Slavka's death, and the case was closed. I did not then talk about the monsters that I saw in this forest. I was afraid that they would just put me in a mental institution. I only said that Slavka had gone into the night, and that someone was walking around the hut, frightening me wildly. Since then, my life has been turned upside down. I'm afraid of everything. I'm afraid of silence, darkness, forests. This face still gives me nightmares, and I can't do anything about it. I'm only glad that I did not end the same way as Slavka.